Good afternoon, and welcome again to Santander's International Banking Conference. We have had two sessions. In the first one, we discussed the role of banks, central banks and governments in the post-COVID economy. In the second session, we discussed the challenges and opportunities of digitalization of payments and banking. And today we're addressing what is probably the most important challenge of today's society, climate change. We are honored and privileged to have with us Vice President of the Spanish government, Teresa Ribera, who will be leading the green reconstruction of our country post-COVID. We also have Peter Bakker, who is CEO of the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, of which Santander is a proud member. We also have José Linares, who is head of our corporate investment banking in Santander and is accompanying many of our customers in their green transition. Thank you all for being here and look forward to a fascinating discussion. We are delighted that there are more than 3,000 people registered to the conference as of today. I encourage you all to use our web and our app, which has interactive features. You will be able to ask questions to the panelists, and you will also be able to answer the questions that James will ask to all of us in order to enrich the debate. And now, before I hand it over to you, James, I would like us to listen to a short video by our chairman, Ana Botín. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. We all know the impact that climate change is having on our environment. We see worrying pictures of forests burning, glaciers melting, all too often. And that change obviously is having a profound impact on our economies and societies. We must build a green economy, and this demands profound change, and not just in how we do business, but in how we live. And this is why tackling climate change and helping the transition to a green economy is so critical for all of us at Santander. As one of the world's largest banks, we have a responsibility to play our part, and not just managing the risks that climate change creates, but making the most of the opportunities that this shift to a green economy, to a green world, presents. The change we must make, if we are to make a lasting impact, is massive. It's existential.
Thank you, and welcome back to the Santander International Business Banking Conference. As you'll know, we have held, as Alejandra said in the introduction, two previous conversations. One, if you like, on the macroeconomy in this extraordinary year. One on the technological revolution. But as Ana Botín just said, this is about the existential crisis well beyond banking, but for all of us. And just to pick up on what Alejandra said, we really are delighted that Teresa Ribera, the Vice President of Spain, is here. Thank you so much, Vice President. It really says a lot about your commitment to this, that you're here and joining us. Peter Bakker, those of you who know this particular issue, the intersection of business and climate change, will know Peter and the World Business Council on Sustainable Development is absolutely critical to businesses thinking on this front. And José Linares is the head of corporate and investment banking, and as I'm sure you're about to hear, is one of the driving forces in finance behind what's happening in the energy transition. So we've got a great group of people here, but the way in which we've tried to approach it this year is to make sure that even though we're not in a room together physically, we are in a room together in the way in which we think in approaching these big questions, and that we're able to hear directly from you. As Alejandra said, we'd love to hear your questions. Do put them in, and I'll try to feed them to the Vice President, to Peter Bakker, to José Linares as well. But before I start, I wanted to see if we could get the mood of the room, get the thinking of the room, even though the room is properly global and encompasses thousands of minds. So I want to just read you the three questions that we've got. In the course of the last conversation, I'm going to come back and read the answers to the room. So please do follow up and answer. There are three questions. The first question is, will the COVID pandemic slow or accelerate the greening of the economy? So you can say it will slow, you can say accelerate, or you can actually say neither. You're going to need to refresh the page because the second question will be, should governments introduce carbon taxes? Simple question, yes or no, introduction of carbon taxes. And then the third question, I suppose, is the most relevant for businesses, but is also the most emotionally true. Do consumers really reward environmentally friendly companies when they make their consumer decisions when they buy? Do they really reward environmentally friendly companies, yes or no? So please do answer those, and as I say, I'll come back up in this conversation. But can I start with you, Vice President? You sit directly at the intersection of politics, climate change, and the real economy in the year of the pandemic. What do you think COVID-19 has done to the prospects of accelerating the energy transition and dealing with the problem of climate change?
Hello, good afternoon, good morning to those being still in morning time. And thanks, James, for the question, and thanks to the Santander Group for inviting me to join this very interesting conversation together with Peter and Jose and all the colleagues in the same room, being in the same global room. I tend to think that this is going to accelerate the change for different reasons. The first one, because we are experiencing globally the same type of vulnerability at the same time. So I think that emotionally, we are all being conscious to what extent things that we could not expect as being so dangerous, may be very dangerous. And eroding the natural capital is quite a dangerous thing. And the climate crisis makes part of those things that we have been saying for a very long time that could be really, really risky. For the way we understand life and prosperity, business, and so on. So I think that psychologically, there are very strong connections between what we are experiencing right now and what we need, or the reasons why we need to act on climate. So that's my first comment. The second comment is that what we have been witnessing these months in the energy sector goes very much along the prescriptions, the understandings, the assumptions that were already stated when trying to figure out how a different way to understand our relation to energy may be. Mm-hmm. So we have been how we are changing because of health reasons, our patterns in terms of mobility, how it impacts to the oil system, and how it may allow us to understand better that we need to prepare when we still have time to change our energy model. And I think that this is also very, very interesting. So security, safety, and prosperity being understood in a different manner. And the third thing is that now that we all try to do our best to facilitate a quick recovery, but a recovery that needs to be transformational, now that we are trying to turn on again the economic machine at home, we have a great opportunity to decide where we want to invest our resources, so to facilitate a long-lasting prosperity. So to introduce the sustainability patterns in our options, in our decisions on where we think it is better to invest and to have a much more powerful tracker to create employment, business opportunities, and so on, so on. The technologies were there, some of them that are very instrumental, and we're still midway, have been accelerating our capacity to survive, but also to improve our quality of life at home, such as the digital solutions, and in the energy field, much had already been done. So I think that in a very simple but holistic manner, there are very good reasons for optimism, even if the world is still quite a bit messy place.
It's a very diplomatic way of putting it. And Vice President, actually, your point about a psychological impact, a sense of a shared destiny, I think a lot of people will listen to you and nod. And I have to say, when I read that Spain had appointed a vice president with the brief for ecological transition, with the responsibility to look at climate change, I thought to myself at the time, wow, they are really taking that agenda seriously. Now I ask myself, given the pressure on budget resources to support the economy, given the anxiety around youth unemployment in particular and getting jobs back into the economy, how has the politics changed? How many of your colleagues in government are, frankly, yes, Vice President, we've got to do climate change, but right now we've got to get the engine running, and we've got to get the engine running fast?
Well, I think that this is, luckily, this has not been an issue for discussion in the government. The discussion has been on how to make it operational in the brightest manner, so to facilitate all the possible positive secondary effects we may create by taking some decisions. And I think that it has not been an issue for different reasons. The first of them being, and this is also important in the business community, that the boss, the leader, was previously convinced of the importance of the transformation. I think that when at the head of any organization, the head promotes such a big and complicated change, things get aligned in a much more easier manner. And this happens in an industrial firm, a financial firm, and of course it also happens at governments, for the good or for the bad, but it happens. Yes. That's the first comment. The second comment is that we had already worked the type of assessment and the identification of issues we needed to transform, to accelerate, to change. We were sure that it was very important to be humble, but to be realistic, so that we could correct the things that did not work as it should when being climate compatible, and create it in a manner that provides confidence for investors and confidence for citizens. So it's hard, it is complicated, but you can make it, and the regulatory signals and the facilities from the social perspective are aligned so that people can walk the path. I think that this is a very important issue too. And then suddenly we had this horrible crisis we are still in the middle of, because I think that we all know that the health crisis is still among us. So we try to figure out how to organize the different policies and measures to facilitate the right incentives to create opportunities for investment and employment, the development of the capacities, the skills to allow a labor market that could facilitate the right skills, and at the same time to be sure that the social measures, the solidarity measures to support the transformation were there. So we had already had an intense experience dealing with the phase out of coal, yes, both the mines and thermal plants. Since the very beginning, we thought that it was very important to think on how to do the phase out in a way that people could live along with this experience. So the emotional and family part deserves recognition from the whole society. The efforts from the institutions to facilitate the creation of opportunities, alternative opportunities in the same regions that are being shaken by the phase out was also very important, and to take into consideration the different players, investors or business communities, or of course neighbors and workers was also very important. So that was also an interesting experience to think, now that we have the chance to speed up many things, how we can combine this type of approaches.
And Vice President, I want to try and have as much of as possible a conversation, certainly between the three of you, Jose and Peter as well. And I definitely want to come back to, the expectations of the business community, but also what only governments can do and what you think only governments need to do. But I'm going to come to Peter, if I might, because Peter, the Vice President was just talking about sort of clarity for the business community. I'm really interested to know, candidly, what you think the mood is amongst chief executives and business leaders now as to where climate sits on their order of priorities.
Well, one of your questions was, do I anticipate has become more or less important during COVID? The answer is very clearly way more important. All the companies that I work with are now really into decarbonizing their operations. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, what COVID has done is it has shown the vulnerabilities in all the supply chains and many of the business models in the world. So resilience to future shock is becoming a very critical topic. And everybody is well aware that COVID is a horrible crisis and has lots of human suffering. But climate change is potentially a much bigger crisis that will come after us. And so resilience is one of the reasons. I think that will have two effects. It will put adaptation back on the agenda where it has dropped off a bit in the past. But secondly, and that is even during the COVID lockdown period, what I begin to see emerge now is a race to the top. We all know that in order to stay below 1.5 degrees, we have to decarbonize, be net zero emissions by no later than 2050. Early on, companies came out saying we will be net zero by 2050. You saw Amazon come at 2040. You've seen Apple, Google, even a traditional OEM like Daimler has come out and will be net zero by 2039. So you begin to see a race to the top. The other thing that I've seen is that the conversations are much easier to bring to boardrooms. Because the funny thing that COVID has done, it's no longer, some scientific professor telling us there's a problem and we may all be in trouble. No, it has come to every doorstep. Every family has been locked in their house. Some of us are still working from home. We're all worried about our families, and every CEO and every board member is the same. And so in some strange way, it has connected us much more. So this now has led to this notion of building forward better, which is a very interesting play of words, because initially when COVID just appeared, people started to talk about building back better. But that language has now completely gone. We're going to build forward better, meaning we're going to have to now radically make the changes that are required. And I, in my role in the World Business Council, work with 200 companies, some a bit deeper than others. But the ones I'm working with deeply, I'm amazed at how transformational the boardroom conversations now are. What does this mean? And how do we move forward?
And I'm going to come to Jose in a moment, because I'm really interested in what the financing of all of this tells us. But can you just touch on two things? One is whether or not this is very variable between sectors and geographies, and also whether it's variable within companies, i.e. if you're talking to the chairman and the chief executive and they've got a public-facing, even quasi-political job, they're talking the talk. But if you sit with the chief finance officer, they're saying, look, we've got a very, very tough year ahead and we don't have the investment capital to make the changes you're talking about.
Obviously, companies do have to worry about survival. Depending, different sectors have been impacted in different ways. Some sectors actually have benefited from the lockdown, some of the high tech or the fast moving consumer goods ones, but others have been heavily hit, and therefore they're in short-term cash flow management type of operations. But the interesting element that I see emerge now, and I'm sure Santander and Jose can talk about that, you see it as well, is it is actually becoming a CFO conversation. Because parallel to the decarbonization of supply chains, the other big conversation that is emerging is, how are we finally going to standardize the ESG disclosures? How are we going to move on TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures? And what can we do to better link these conversations with the investors in the capital markets? And that's a conversation that CEOs now need to own, and that I see step up to this.
Well, Peter, I'd love to come back to you on that, particularly the standardization around ESG and also the rollout of TFSD. I think that's a really big subject. Jose, would you pick up on what Peter's saying? Because I think you probably have a position where you see the extent to which there is or there isn't money moving into energy transition, climate change oriented investment? And what do you see? Is the finance following what Peter's saying in terms of the CEO intentions?
It's very interesting. I don't know if it is COVID or not, but I think over the last 3, 4, 5 months, something has happened where there is a monumental change. And I'm just going to give you a couple of statistics, right? If you look at the performance of Ørsted, which is a pure play, clean energy company, I think it is up. I'm going to look at my notes, but it's up, 100% this year, 4 times in the last 5 years. That's a pure play, right? If you look at RWE, all of this, clients of the firm, they started their own transformation, about a year or 2 ago. They've doubled in price since they made the announcement. There is an ETF that tracks all of the clean energy companies, and iShares company is up 3 times this year, right? And it's 10 times in the last 5 years. And so if you go to what I forgot who said that there's the dictatorship of capital markets, there is an enormous amount of capital going after the sector. Okay, mm-hmm. I think it reminds me a little bit to the early 90s with the advent of the internet. And to pick up on the video from our chairman, Anna Botín, I think for the banks, it is, and for everybody actually, this is a big, big opportunity. Mm-hmm. So the dialogue with CEOs and CFOs and investors has shifted from, we need to be compliant with, the Paris Accord, or, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050 or 2040, or, raising to the top, is changed to this is an issue of survival.
Right.
If we don't, so first of all, investors are giving you the full benefit for going through that route, which by definition also means that they're starting to penalize if you don't address the issues. So I think it has become an issue of survival. I got to tell you, this year, there is not a single conversation in the C-suite, and that includes CEO, CFO, head of M&A, strategy, et cetera. There's not a single one that does not include, energy transformation, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, the things that Peter has also said, about, the taxonomy, having a common standards. I think we've got to work together, no doubt about that, on a global basis. But the private sector and the capital markets is moving with enormous aggression. I think we've only seen the very beginning, yes. And I think the trend is here to stay.
And Jose, I'm really interested by your comparison between this in climate and the early days of the internet. And I think you started out, in fact, as what people used to call an internet banker, someone who was financing this change. Can you just tell us a little bit about what the similarities are, and also, given what we learned in the internet, what you're looking for when you describe there is an enormous amount of capital going after the sector? What do you mean by the sector? Where are the investments that you're really looking at that are most interesting? Which are the companies, and how are they doing them?
Hard to call it. That's why it reminds me at the very beginning of the internet, right? When I remember back in the day, I remember going and visiting a company in a garage in Miami, 3 computers, and 3 partners telling me they're worth $10 billion. This is early 90s, so it's a different $10 billion, today. And many of them made it. I mean, obviously there is the Amazons, the Googles, et cetera. Many didn't, right? But there was enormous amount of capital that was deployed in the sector. So the way I think about this is we are at a moment of change, big change, that will impact everybody, not just the energy companies, not just the oil companies, not just the electric utility companies. It'll impact you, me, us, everybody. And so the same way that the internet, initially we didn't think it was going to have the impact that it has had in our daily lives. So, obviously when we looked at solar, when we looked at wind, there is now years of, and those sectors grew under subsidization, let's call it as it is. Whereas today the prices of producing energy from there are comparable to, carbon, hydro, et cetera. And so they can be self-sustainable. But when we start thinking about, hydrogen, there's nothing new about hydrogen, but probably there is not the technology that makes this very clean. We're talking about smart meters, we're talking about smart cities, we're talking about carbon capturing technologies, right? We're talking about lithium for batteries. So there's plenty, the ecosystem, you can go and increase it on and on and on and on. And so ultimately, who knows, who's going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers. Too early to tell at this stage. But I think the important part is there is enormous amount of capital willing to bet. And I think it is very important because the private sector will use that capital, will deploy it, will invest, and many technologies are going to emerge out of this as the winner technologies. And by the way, the other side of that is that if you're not in the race, if you are an old economy company, for the lack of a better expression, you might die. So if you're a board, you're a C-suite right now, you are concerned.
So, Jose, I'm going to come back to you because, when you raise the point about hydrogen, it's a perfect example. We can actually understand the three different actors in this, looking at the three of you, the businesses that can build those, hydrogen systems, the governments that mandate what's expected of them, and the financiers who can put in the money that make it happen. I just want to go back to Peter and the Vice President, if I might. Peter, just tell us, if you would, what do you think reasonably should be expected? If you were sitting in the Vice President's chair, what do you think business can reasonably be expected to do on its own? What the demands of the capital markets that Jose just outlined and the pressure of consumers on business leaders will mean that they can reasonably be expected to do on their own? And I want to come to the Vice President and get a sense of what she thinks government needs to do to step in.
Well, I think what business can do on its own is, first and foremost, every serious business now has to set a target to be net zero by whatever year they pick. It can't be later than 2050. Like I said before, I see a race to the top emerge there. The second thing they need to do, and that's where most businesses are working on now, and it's not always proven to be easy, is put in place an operating plan that is science informed, i.e. that aims to halve emissions by 2030, and identify the technologies or the investments or the business model changes that you need to make to be able to achieve that. So from a high level long-term commitment to a relatively short-term, let's call it 10-year operating plan, that needs to be put in place. I would say the third thing that a business can do is upgrade its governance to be ready for TCFD disclosures. And this is not just the reporting of ESG, that's an element of it. More importantly, it is integrating climate risk into the strategic scenarios for your business. And again, depending on which business you're in, which sector you're in, like Jose said, for many sectors, not having the right strategic scenario will mean you'll be out of business if the world moves to a decarbonized society. So that would be the third thing. The fourth element, and that's a very contentious issue at the moment, I would dare to say that, again, few business sectors excluded, there's almost no business sector that can get to net zero without natural climate solutions or offset solutions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the whole natural climate solutions, whether it's reforestation or other solutions, will require new investments, will require a market to be formed with credible projects that companies can then invest in, mm-hmm. but will also require that governments and civil society agree with a certain level of offsetting. And that's where the contentious element at the moment comes in.
And actually, I want to stick with the contentious element before I come to the Vice President, because I think I'd be interested to know, Peter, what members of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development say to you when they say privately, we really need clarity around price, and we really look government to do that. There's lots of data flying around, but there's not agreed data, there's not standards on data. There's not even some international agreement around what areas of the energy transition we should be backing and which shouldn't be. Can we have some clarity around the assets we should support and those we shouldn't? And before I go to the Vice President, I just want a sense of you of what business would really want to see greater clarity on and have some specifics from government to work to.
Well, I think, there's a couple of those items. One is business will continue to ask for much clearer signal on carbon pricing. But to be honest, I've been around this game now for a good number of years. We've been asking for it, but it doesn't come. But we'll continue to ask for it because it will be the greatest accelerator that there is.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, we will be asking to make TCFD mandatory in as many countries in the world. And within that, a hard push for a standardized ESG disclosure. Because if all companies start reporting against the same standard in a TCFD manner, then investors like José, they can review and compare the data of all the companies, and then the better companies should get a higher capital allocation or a lower cost of capital. So that's the second thing where you need government. So can we get a mandatory TCFD so that all business reports and that all company performances become comparable? And then the third element is the conversation around natural climate solutions. Mm-hmm. Really needs to be bedded down. In the climate negotiations, that means Article 6 needs to come to a conclusion, which anyone who works in the climate space knows is a nightmare, but something needs to be put in place to recognize the enormous potential that carbon sequestration has.
So, Vice President Peter, thank you. Can we take those one at a time, if you like, Vice President? Can we start with carbon pricing? Peter put it very diplomatically, but I think the climate world is really frustrated by the fact that this has been talked about for a long time and little progress has been made. What do you think the outlook is?
Well, first, I can understand many frustrations because I also live my own frustrations, but I don't think that we can say that there has been a failure. The other way around, I think that the way Europe has built all its climate policies around a signal on price, and it is hard to learn how we can create from the scratch the signal on carbon price, and we have been learning about that. We have accepted that we need to build corridors so to provide some flexibility. We have also understood that the impact of a high carbon price is not necessarily good for everything, of course. And in the transitional times, there may be some difficulties. And someone was asking me about the Gilets jaunes in France 2 years ago. So I think that we need to count on this, and we need to tackle it with much care. And I think that for the time being, the system does work at the European level, and it has been a very relevant driver for the business community and the financial community to understand why they are at risk if they do not digest what this means and what the regulatory risk may be in the time to be. That could be my first comment. My second comment is that I think that to a certain extent, this is good, but not enough if there is not a level playing field everywhere. So we open the discussion to what it means. Do we need a single carbon market, or at least some compatible carbon markets where we understand what it means here or there? That's probably a pragmatic way to proceed. If the Article 6 of a single format may not work for the time being, or what we do when we can see a kind of dumping on carbon coming from some countries that do expect to enter into interesting markets but do not apply a price on carbon. And these are the type of discussions we are all already having. And I think that in the mid ground, there are some very interesting experience of how to say non-official learning process, and the financial sector has a very important role to play there. And I think that before regulating on a tough fixed standards on how to measure, what to measure, and how to be transparent on what, and to attach a concrete consequence to any of these things, there may be a need for some smooth but quick learning process. And I think that this explains why we are still allowing different types of criteria and guidelines to learn on internally what this means for my own business and my own portfolio, what are the risks I hadn't understood I was facing or I may be in a position to be confronted to, and how can I be best from those dangers so that that my risk is lower, and what type of information I should be providing for those willing to invest in my own company or to buy my own products or to increase my own credibility. And I think that this is interesting. This is the learning process. And then we enter into something that goes a little bit beyond. And this is why we work on this green taxonomy that maybe is still quite open, but provides a much more common ground for everybody, at least in Europe, if we accelerate the incorporation of these references everywhere. I don't think that we are going to have a fixed price on carbon in the very short term everywhere, or at least the same fixed price on carbon. And of course, it is certain that at the end, that's the most direct and critical manner to provide a signal of value or a risk.
Vice President, I want to come back to you on the subject of the EU's taxonomy. Which sectors to support, which not support, because it's such because as you say, it's more positive, there's more progress there, but also it's so significant for investors and businesses. But before I do that, I'm just going to go back to José Linares, because you talked about the responsibility of the financial sector. And José, I'm really interested to know what you think, and I suppose what Santander thinks in response to these responsibilities on things like the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, on ESG data being applied to investment criteria, and the application of finance to accelerate the energy transition. Can you tell us a bit about your thinking on that?
Yeah, look, I think, I'm a little bit here with what Peter said, quite frankly. We're all for having a level playing field, which is also what the Vice President has said. We're all for, having the right disclosure. We're all for having the rules of the game. But I got to tell you, the market is going to get us there violently, right? So we, it goes back to the comments that I make at the beginning. Either we change ourselves quickly or the capital markets will change us. So I rather control our destiny. And I think as a Santander, as a firm and as a bank, we're absolutely committed in participating on all of this, in helping on the agenda. But I do think that it is not, and the problem with this is that, some firms are going to be more aggressive than others. Yeah. And what you don't want is an arbitrage, right? That other people pick it up, et cetera. But I think, over, a short period of time, I think the capital market is going to be is going to level the playing field, and either you are disclosing, either you are participating on this, or you're actually not going to benefit from a proper valuation, and ultimately feeds back on what is your cost of capital, makes you uncompetitive, and then you lose the game, right? So I think I'm all for having all of this. I think we've committed to most of the things that we're talking about here. Certainly we're doing our part. I think it's very exciting. But I think that, that's nice. Yes. But if we don't do this, I got to tell you, And that's why, when people say, would governments should put taxes, penalties, I'm like, don't worry about that. The capital markets will take care of us.
It's really interesting. Yes, so I'm the Vice President. Yes.
I have a couple of comments because I think that what Jose has said is absolutely true. I think at the end, the cost of capital, the branding, the risk of liability are very strong forces. And in the meantime, before becoming something compulsory by law, it's good for people and business community to understand, learn, improve, so to make full use and wise use of the time to be adapted before everything comes on. So I think that, yes, I agree. Then I have another comment on carbon price and carbon taxes. This who takes, this is an argument for regulation. Who gets the difference and what for? And I think that this explains why there are also big discussions on whether it is better to provide market tools or whether it is better to introduce a direct tax on carbon emissions. And I think that we will be living with both type of approaches, mixed approaches a little bit everywhere. But I think that it is an interesting element which will become at the core of the European discussion now that we see that, for instance, the Commission is thinking about buildings and mobility being part of the European trading scheme. I'm not sure this is the most adequate manner to reflect the price on carbon. I think that probably it is more complicated and a little bit more, I don't know, it is the best solution in social terms to deal with the need to provide right signals and incentives for improving the carbon footprint of this activity. So I think that we are still learning also on which are the mechanisms to allocate in a proper way the signal we want to send.
So, and on that, Vice President, will you just talk us through this issue of the EU's taxonomy? Because it sounds very complicated, but it's incredibly important in, which technologies, which energy sources, which projects are going to get the investment and backing, and how the transformation is going to take place. So will you just talk us through what the EU taxonomy promises and what likelihood it is that it will deliver?
Well, I think that it is still, the assessment is getting more and more sophisticated, but it is still quite open. So I perceive, my impression is that it is perceived still as a means to learn, to better understand. So it is not prescriptive. You only can do this or that. Mm-hmm. But depending on what you are trying to push, it is dark green, low light green, or not even green at all. But it is still quite a tool, which very honestly, I think it is very important. I don't, as being part of a government, I don't need 5 excellent examples. I need a very good average. So I need everybody on board. And I think that, well, I say it as part of the responsibility of being part of a government, but I think that this type of comment could come from anyone. We all need that the average raises the bar quite fast, and in order to do so, the financial sector and the finance signal, the price signal is quite powerful. So I think that the taxonomy is a very relevant instrument to provide room for learning, but also to get the right signal to make your own assessment of where you are.
Completely. I just want to come back to Peter, because Peter, you begin to see the outlines of this relationship between government, business and finance. You can see the political difficulties the Vice President talks around about carbon. You can see those points. You can see the force of the capital markets. I just want to go back to the point that you touched on, and there's a risk that we sort of brush past it, which was around agreed data around environmental impacts and standardization and reporting. Can you just talk about what you think needs to be done in order to achieve that, because that will sit somewhere between government and finance and change corporate behavior.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with Teresa, who was vice president, on we don't need 5 more Unilevers showing us what could be done. We need now the whole business community to move forward. The most powerful accelerator is indeed what José was saying. If the capital markets start excluding companies because they do not disclose or they don't have a plan, that will accelerate the move to sustainability faster than anything, given the political difficulties to get certainly global solutions negotiated. In order to do that, though, in order for the capital markets to be able to do that, you need to have comparable data between companies.
Yes.
It's obvious that if a company refuses to disclose anything, that's an easy exclusion. But at the moment, there is such an alphabet soup of reporting frameworks, which they all smell the same, but they're very different. So, and that's why we've been arguing for a long time now, we need consolidation in the non-financial space. That's step one. IMP, the Integrated Management Project, has published, together with the major non-financial reporting frameworks, a letter of intent recently. So GRI, SASB, CDSP, they've all come together. That now needs to be picked up by the IFRS, turn it into the accounting rules, and then we can say, okay, you all have financial accounting rules. Now we will also move towards non-financial accounting rules. And at that moment, the capital markets can begin to pick it up and compare. Well, there you have a player like IOSCO, another bit of alphabet, but they can begin to put in. They make the stock listing regulations and the likes.
Okay.
So that's really the regulation towards capital markets. At that moment, once you've built that building, and my expectation is that is now in process, will be built in the next 2 years. Then investors and corporations can come together and you can have really informed conversations. What is decision useful information for an investor? And as and when a company provides that, how will that impact their capital allocation or valuation models? And that's, José said the right thing. A more sustainable company should attract a lower cost of capital. And then we're off to the races.
And then will you just also touch on the task force on climate-related financial disclosures? Because I remember, I think when Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of England, I remember him explaining TCFD to me, and I remember thinking, this is just a revolution. You know, when I started out as a reporter, the idea that banks would be disclosing their emissions and their carbon footprint was just, and that this would be forced by the Bank of England was just extraordinary to me. Given that happened, I now don't understand why that's not mandatory. I mean, it's got the, and given that so many banking institutions are backing it, why is that not now an absolute essential part of the financial services world?
Yeah, I think it's what Mark Carney now has the ambition to achieve in COP26. That's his big push in his role as special envoy. I think maybe TCFD step back. It asks a few things, and it's not as straightforward as here's a set of data points. Why don't you report them? The ask of TCFD is integrate climate risks in every layer of a corporation's governance, i.e., from the highest non-executive board to the operating shop floor. That requires quite some education. You know, let's just look at supervisory boards. There are not that many supervisory boards that have members that understand enough about climate risks to be able to have a sensible conversation. So we can ask them to include it in their governance, but it takes time for them to know what to do with it. The second one is the easy one, the disclosure part. The third one is a very tough one, and that is integrated into your strategic scenarios. What will happen to your business model in a 1.5 degree world, i.e., in a decarbonized world? Well, if you're, if you're running a wind power energy company, that's probably good news, and you're looking good. If you're heavily invested in fossil fuels, that's going to require a material transformation of the operations.
Exactly.
Well, again, that's a piece of work that every company has to do, that I see more and more companies do. But my exposure is 200 of the leading companies in the world. There are millions of companies out there who probably have never even heard what TCFD is. So it sounds easier than it is, so why don't we just make it mandatory? Because implementing it will require quite some change.
So, Peter, thank you. Vice President, I'm going to ask you to do two difficult things, not just one. One is, I want to try and get a sense from you of the global responsibility for political leaders. There's been a question from Gabriel Costa, who just put, I thought, a really important question, which is, how do we make transition to renewable energy become state policy, particularly in economies that are hugely dependent on natural resources like Latin America? And I know that a number of people on the call are all over the world, as I said, not least in Latin America. So I want you to sort of think about the answer, but I'm also going to give everyone the answer to the poll I asked at the beginning, which I'm afraid, Vice President, also you'll find lands to a certain extent on your plate. So the questions were, if you remember, will the COVID pandemic slow or accelerate the greening of the economy? Well, you will be largely happy to know that most people buy the story that you, Vice President, and Jose and Peter put, i.e. 67% say it will accelerate, so more than 2/3 think it will accelerate, 22% think it will slow, and 11% think neither, right? The second question, should government introduce carbon taxes? 81% say yes, 81%, and 19% say no. Quite interesting, I would have said, at an international banking conference. And then the third is, do consumers reward environmentally friendly companies? Do consumers reward environmentally friendly companies? The answer was 59% yes and 41% no. So, Vice President, as we come towards the end of this conversation, I wondered whether you could address both of those things. One is the question of the kind of global responsibility of our political leadership, and two, just the response to the poll and where the public pressure is.
Thank you. I think that both questions do apply to the third scope that Peter was commenting, no? How to introduce in the strategic context all these elements and how we can ensure that what we do is consistent. I think that on the first side, the two main challenges, the two main barriers is these educational skills to understand why it is important, it is worthy, and how we get rid of those elements that come because of the inertia from the past and do not help anymore. And this means different regulation, different physical infrastructure in the grids, different combination of business models to facilitate the electrification of some final uses and so on. So at the end, the photovoltaic panels is a commodity. The windmills is a commodity. All that has become much easier than it used to be. But introducing and thinking together the architect, the engineer, the grid manager, the mayor that needs to say yes to introducing your roof solar panels, all those things are non-technological difficulties, barriers that we need to overcome. And it can happen also on the one having to say yes or no to the financial closure of any type of project that doesn't assess properly the type of risk or incentive. So that's one thing, to develop the skills to understand why, and at the same time to learn how to phase out all those inertial difficulties, because we used to think this way or solve the things this way, and now it is not anymore a possible way forward. So that could be my first comment. And I think that in order to do so, the facilitation of the solutions is very important. So to provide the whole package as a single way to respond to your needs in the households, because the architect, the electricity person, and the permits of the city council come, or the financial need is already covered by a bank, and you get the unity, the whole package. Is very important. Facilitate things for the final users. And the other thing is that we still have many contradictions in the way we provide the signals from the regulatory context.
Yes.
So it's still the fair to turn the page is something which is very difficult for governments. And in order to turn the page, it is important to be sure that we have a buffer to facilitate the transformation. This is why I think that being very bold, very clear on the long-term objectives and the mid-term objectives to facilitate this type of corridors on how to organize things is key. And on your answers, I think it is very good news. I'm going to share this data with my colleagues here in the government. Taxation as a good thing to provide resources to facilitate the transformation on the social policies and so on, and to get environmental friendly responses. I think that this is more clear when we talk about the big headlines than when we talk about the very concrete demands. And I think that for the very concrete demands, we need to be sure that we have properly identified those communities that may feel threatened by these measures, and to be sure we have a proper response to lower the sense of threat that they may have if they are vulnerable communities and so on, because that could be very, very important.
No, it feels actually, Vice President, listening to you and this whole conversation, that we really have moved, that it's gone from a few examples, a few outliers that are excellent, to the whole question of bringing everyone on board and actually including everyone in this. So I think it's a really interesting theme to our conversation. I'm going to end, if I might, just by coming to José Linares, because José, the thing that I found really invigorating about listening to you today is this idea of just the dynamism in the markets around this. Can you give us a little more texture to that? As in, when you look around, you mentioned hydrogen earlier. Where is there most competition amongst your colleagues to find opportunities for investment? Where is there most capital going towards? Just give us a signal. It's pointing right there. I imagine that's office or Spain. Yeah.
So, before we finish, you asked the question of why aren't we doing the disclosure more aggressively? And let me answer that, because I think it's important. Because we're scared. We're scared to go and find out that we have a ton of exposure that pollutes and it's bad stuff, right? So nobody likes to look at oneself in the mirror and really say, So when we looked at this, and I didn't know this, so shame on me, we were the biggest financier in the world in renewable assets, and I didn't know this, right? And so at the same time, when you're looking at this, and yes, we do have exposure to, obviously, producers of, oil and all of that, great clients of ours. And when you realize of how much renewable investments we have participated as a bank all over the world, then you realize, and that's why I'm a huge proponent of giving incentives as opposed to penalties. It is whether it is, for banks, capital relief for these types of things, or taxes, tax advantages, et cetera. But so the dynamism is everywhere, right? It's a bit what I've said about the internet. And I was looking at the vice president saying in Spain, absolutely. You cannot imagine the fights that I have between investors and companies for renewable assets in Spain. They call me like this is something simple, right? It is like, if you have renewable stuff in Spain, just tell me where and we'll pay for it. So there is enormous, and what we need to do is obviously be not just the banks, but all of the participants, whether it's investors, private equity, and the producers of energy. We all need to be part of the ecosystem that helps this process move. And I think going back to the 2 points that were made before, we need to have a level playing field, because that's where the ecosystem really becomes legit and blossoms.
Jose, thank you. I see that we've run out of time. I wanted to say two thank yous. Firstly, I just should say thank you, Vice President. One of the things that's very difficult, it seems to me, about digital conversations like this is how do you pick up on non-verbal communication? And in that simple moment of where's the money going, right here, I thought you showed that you can do non-verbal communication on a Zoom call. So hats off to you on that. But more importantly, I really appreciate the fact that we can have a conversation like this that is, invigorating on the pace and the direction of change, but is also candid about the steps that are needed. And, the point that you made, Vice President, about not just a few excellent examples, but bringing everyone along, the point that, Peter made around TCFD, around ESG, are really interested in natural solutions to climate change. That's obviously a big subject to look into. And Jose, just listening to you, a sort of second age of that internet banking, climate banking, is such an invigorating thought that you've left us all with a different, I suppose, perspective on 2020, a much more positive one, and one with great potential. Thank you for that. The next installment, the next week of the Santander International Banking Conference is next week. We're talking, for reasons I can't begin to imagine, about democracy, the United States, and its relationship with Europe and the world. Please do join us. We've got an amazing cast. The former French Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin, the former Spanish Foreign Minister Ana Palacio, and two of the great kind of political heavyweights in the US today, Jim Messina and Samantha Power. Please do join, it should be fascinating. But for now, I'm afraid, Vice President and Peter and Jose, we can't applaud you, but we can wave. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time.